You're listening to the Love Over Addiction podcast. Hey, how are you? All right, so today I'm going to be a little risky here. I don't love what I'm about to talk about. I'm nervous because I think that some of you might really disagree with me, but I've got to. You guys, I've wanted to record this episode for so long, and I've bit my tongue for many years because I don't want to come across as preachy or telling you what you should or shouldn't do. But I feel so passionate about this. And when I think about how I'm always telling you guys, think about your next 5 years, and make a decision for today on where you want to be 5 years from now when you love someone struggling with addiction. I think about, that's an exercise I use, and I left my ex-husband who struggles with addiction, but I learned that tool back when I loved him, and I'm still apply it to my life today. Where do I want to be? What are my goals for my future, and how am I getting there? And when I think about the future of where I would like to be in 5-6 years, or maybe even earlier, I think about still being in the field of addiction, but more behind the policies or nonprofits of educating children, youth about addiction. Because here's why. It is, I every week for years and years, I've talked about loving someone struggling with addiction. But the more research I do, the more that I realize addiction starts at a very young age, whether it's because of a genetic predisposition, whether it's, because they had easy access to alcohol, or whether they, grew up with addiction in their family. But if we're going to break the cycle of addiction, and a lot of research suggests that there is a genetic predisposition. Like my children who I've had 3 children from my ex-husband, have a 50 to 60% chance of becoming addicted just based on their genes from their father, their biological father. No matter how nurturing of an environment I provide them, they are at risk. And so when I think about, okay, well, how do we break the cycle, the genetic cycle? I think we should go back and say, well, it starts with educating sobriety, like educating and advocating for sobriety, like from a very young age, like actually saying to our children, look, there's a possibility you might have this genetic factor, and therefore you should consider the idea that you should abstain from all alcohol and all drugs for your entire life. Like, let's start there. And I'm in this class right now, and you guys are going to get sick of me talking about this, and I apologize, but I'm in this Stanford class right now, and we're discussing how it is not considered, like a lot of people drink for social reasons. Like there's a social stigma with addiction where if you're in a large group, it's kind of, there's a stigma against raising your hand and saying I suffer from addiction. But there is just as much social stigma as raising your hand and saying, I'm not going to drink. And the only reason I know this is because my kids, I've always advocated for them not drinking. I knew this research very, very early on in their youth. And I made it a point when I was a mom that I knew I was having kids from a man who struggled with addiction. And I knew I wanted children. I wanted to be a mom. So I knew there was risks. I didn't understand the entirety of it. And then that's what led me down to the research, and knowing that they have this predisposition. I started at a very young age of saying, you cannot drink. You can never use drugs. It's just not an option for you. Obviously, as your mom, you live with me, and now I have, I can give you consequences when you're younger if you live with me and you drink or use drugs. But when you're older, you have your own autonomy. You're going to have to choose. But I'd like you to consider the science about this, right? I started that messaging at a very young age because my greatest nightmare is not that my greatest nightmare was not that my husband would ever get sober. Like, not ever get sober. That was not my greatest nightmare. My greatest nightmare was that one of my kids would become addicts, because I did not want my children, I do not want my children to suffer like my ex-husband did. My ex-husband, I've always said, was a very good man with tremendous potential, and addiction ripped his life away from him. And I do not want that to happen to my kids. And that was my greatest fear, and still is. And my oldest is 20 years old. You guys know I have a bunch of children. And in this family, if you live with us, or you are a member of this family, we have expectations that you won't choose abstinence from alcohol or drugs. I just assumed, was my mistake. I assumed all parents, and I don't know why I assumed this. This was my negligence. Like, how could I have been learning and studying, researching addiction for so long and writing about all my findings and not understand this, that parents are not only, not telling their kids to drink or use drugs, they're providing the alcohol for them at underage. I didn't know this. Until recently, you guys, and I feel like a Pollyanna almost. Like, how could I have not? It's like the scales come off your eyes and you see clearly, and you're like, how did I miss this for so long? And let me tell you why. Because my oldest is 20, and he has made it very clear from the very beginning that he will never use drugs or alcohol. And he's a rule follower. So there was for a period of time, he needed to go on a special diet where there was no gluten, no dairy. And I would have to drive to his school, which was 40 minutes away one way, if he had forgotten his lunch, because he refused to eat if there was only gluten or dairy available. Like, he stuck by the rules. You say, this is, as long as there's a purposeful why behind the rule, he gets it, he obeys it, he follows it. So when I grew up educating him about his biological father, and then with the science behind it, that was all he needed. He was all in, there's no way I'm ever going to do this. And he has a girlfriend, and he said, I will not date anybody who drinks or uses drugs either, which by a miracle, he found a girl who doesn't. And they have been together for a couple of years now. And so anyways, he went off to college, and I said to him, I think I've told you guys this before, I said to him, are you feeling pressure at all to drink or use drugs? He goes, Mom, everyone around me drinks. And I said, how does that make you feel? And he's like, well, I just tell them that he tells them that he has this chromosome that doesn't allow him to metabolize alcohol correctly, which very much could be true. And I am not one for advocating lying, except with this. I'm like, yes, you definitely have that chromosome, which we both laugh at it because we don't know. But he says, I have it. And he goes to a college a very smart college with a lot of intellects. So he said, I had to make it sound incredibly intelligent. And I even have the number of the chromosome memorized so that when I say it, they just take it at face value and go, oh, okay, got it. And they don't question me. So that's great. So he uses that in social situations. But he was telling me the way kids look at him when he says that he doesn't drink, everyone, it's more of a social stigma to not drink than it is to overly drink and show signs of alcoholism. So that was very eye-opening and shocking. And then my second daughter was applying to colleges, And of course, me being the research fanatic that I am, I'm like, okay, and she wants to join a sorority. I know nothing about sororities. I never joined one when I was younger. My son has absolutely zero interest in fraternities. My oldest does. I'm sure I'll have others that do. But she was like, I want to join a sorority. And so I was like, okay, let's figure out sororities. That is a whole nother discussion. We need to discuss sororities, guys. I don't have a podcast about sororities, but if I did, I'm just floored at what I'm learning about sororities. But whatever. Point is, the socialization around sororities, whether they want to advertise it or not, is drinking. So I'm sitting here as a mama bear going, oh my gosh, this is going to happen to my daughter. Like, what? I don't want to discourage her from joining a group of a sisterhood and doing what she wants to do. At the same time, I'm completely so paranoid about this. So she looked at some colleges, and one of them in particular, which shall remain nameless because I don't want to smear any institution. One of them was a top 10 party school. And of course, I know all the party schools because I've already tried to get my kids to steer away from them. But I started Googling and researching kids that attended this school and what is the percentage of children that don't drink, right? And of course, when we go on a school tour and we have 2 tour guides, I'm the mom that raises a hand and is like, what about drinking? And because this was a party school, they were like, yeah, we've dealt with that question a lot. And we have a reputation for being heavy drinking. And I was like, yeah, especially in sororities, if I have a daughter who wants to join. And they were saying it is a very much a part of the culture. But if you don't drink, they have a floor on the campus that is dedicated to kids who don't drink. So I'm like, okay, well, that sounds great. And my daughter was like, I'll just join that floor. Well, more research come to find out that floor is probably got about 10 to 12 kids. So 10 to 12 kids are at least wanting to be on this floor out of, I think there was 30,000 kids on campus. And of those kids, most of them were international students who were on that floor, and they don't drink for religious purposes, which is cool. Great. Whatever reason you don't want to drink is fine by me. But I'm sitting here going, okay, I don't know if my daughter would have as much in common with these kids as she thinks she would. And also what I found out is that a lot of these colleges that have these floors, their parents, and I'm making fun of myself here, say yeah, my daughter wants to be on that floor, and they really don't. And so once the kid is out from under the parents' eyes, they get on this floor, but then they still drink and bring alcohol onto the floor, which they're not supposed to do and are supposed to get kicked out. But this is kids and this is college, and we all know there's a lot of underage drinking on college campuses. So it's not really the effectiveness of a drug or alcohol-free zone on campuses is questionable, right? So I told my daughter this, and she's like, "Okay, then I won't do that." And then on our tour, this was hilarious. We walked by some fraternity houses. There was a guy with his shirt off, sitting on the sign. They had a massive sign that was on the lawn of the fraternity house, the whatever fraternity, the Greek symbols of the fraternity. He was sitting on the sign with his shirt off with 2 beers in his hands. And we walked by this guy, and everyone was on the lawn drinking too. And the funniest part about it was 9:30 in the morning. So that was really eye-opening too. I was like, oh, okay. I went to a very small private college, and that would never have been allowed. So times have changed, and things are different with bigger schools. So we got done with our tour, and as a mom who I try to keep a quiet mouth with my kids as much as possible. Not always successful, I will admit. I was like, okay, inside, panicking, like sheer, like, red flag, warning, don't let her go here. No, 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 let's leave. We don't even need to finish the tour. Just get in the car, go. The guy with the belly is drinking at 9:30. We out of here. But on the outside, I was like, oh, isn't the grass green? Look at these old buildings. How wonderful. So I'm trying very hard to put on a persona because ultimately the colleges need to be my kids' choice, not mine. And I certainly am not going to, project or try not to project my stuff onto my kids. So I keep a quiet mouth, but secretly I'm losing my mind going, oh my gosh, if she ends up coming here, I am like hiding in the bushes around the clock to make sure that she's okay. But she ended up not going there because it was too large. And she came to the decision that actually the drinking culture was not what she wanted because this school is notorious for a party culture and also very high rates of sexual assault there. So she came to that decision 100% on her own not to attend there for that reason. But that actually like kickstarted me going, okay, well, what are the rates of drinking on these college campuses? What are the reputations? And again, I started reading blogs of previous students who attended there who were talking about their experiences. And it was so eye-opening to hear about how kids who did not drink felt pressured and ostracized by other peers to drink. So there was one guy who was like, look, I belong to a fraternity. I don't drink, but I have ADHD. And so I naturally act goofy anyways. I'm the guy that at the party is like standing in the middle of the circle, like drinking or not drinking, dancing and like acting goofy. And you'd think that I was drunk, but I just have ADHD, which is hysterical. I loved his honesty. And he's like, nobody gives me a hard time about it. So I did find that one instance. A lot of other kids, though, were reporting the exact opposite. They were saying it was so much a part of the culture, even from day one, that kids, part of the initiation of welcoming them to college is drinking. Part of the way that the college clubs maintain independence from the college is through financial donations, but not financial donations through the parents, financial donations through the sale of alcohol. So they would buy a keg and they would attract people to their club through having beer there, and then they would make money off of selling individual cups of beer. So this was not only baked into the culture of these institutions, but also off of the extracurricular activities of colleges. And so kids who were non-drinkers were saying, I can't get away from it. Like if I want to be involved in college and have hobbies and have friends, I'm just going to have to learn how to be somebody who doesn't drink amongst a lot of drinkers. And that really, I know you guys are going to be like, Michelle, really? Really? Yeah, it really shocked me, guys. I thought when I went to college, which was way back in the day, I never even paid attention to if people were drinking or not. It wasn't a huge party culture at all. It was a smaller school, but like it wasn't that big of a deal. And I guess times have really, really changed to be where it's normal to drink or use drugs, and it is not normal to not drink. But what is even more shocking to me, this is what really blew my mind, is my daughter just graduated high school and she had prom, and I am talking to all the other mothers about their daughters going to prom, and it is blowing my mind how many parents are saying they are hosting party after parties, and they're going to ask the kids to hand in their keys and lock them away, and then serve them alcohol. Now, I know. Some of you are sitting there going, yeah, Michelle, kids drink in high school. Duh. It's like, I'm not going to be that naive parent that believes that my kids won't drink, so I might as well be the parent that allows them to drink safely. I hear that argument. I do. And I know you have a point. At the same time, what I have learned about addiction, what I have taught about addiction, is that there are genetic genes that will be turned on when they take and start abusing or drinking on a regular basis. That addiction doesn't start, like, it's not like you have a beer and then all of a sudden you're an addict homeless on the streets. This is a progressive disease. And the way that it starts is by drinking at a young age. There has been studies and proof. If you want to learn more about this, a great book to start with is How to Raise a Drug-Free Child. It's a terrific book. I highly recommend. But the author talks about the younger the age that they start, the greater the chances of addiction become. So if you're sitting here saying, okay, I'm not going to teach my kid to abstain from alcohol or drugs because they have a genetic predisposition, or they have a 50 to 60% chance of having, you don't know, and there's no way to tell. Unfortunately, there is no way that I know of. There's no science, there's no test you can take. There's been initial testing, but they haven't. Anyways, there's no conclusive 100% proof-free way of saying if you have this genetic predisposition or not, which is very sad, right? But if you're listening to this podcast, the reason you're listening is because you love someone suffering from addiction. And if you have kids with that person, then they have a 50% to 60% chance of becoming like the person you love with their addiction. So all of us together should consider the idea of not enabling our children to drink at a young age, and consider the idea that we have a responsibility to educate our children about abstaining for the rest of their life. Now, I know that might make you sound like a Debbie Downer. I get it. It's like you want your kids to have fun. You don't want to push them away. You don't want to fight with them. You don't want to, you want to have a relationship with them. You don't want to be the bad guy. I totally get that. But if we don't stop sitting there saying, well, kids will be kids, and I'm not going to be naive about it. I know they're going to drink with or without me. If we don't stop that kind of messaging, then addiction is going to continue to take over more and more and more lives. And wouldn't you rather be the bad guy that your child doesn't like, rather than dealing with a child who is in severe pain and turmoil based on them being addicted? Like, isn't the payoff for you greater if you can have them hate you, but follow your rules and learn to be drug and alcohol free, than deal with the social, psychological, financial ramifications of having a kid who's addicted? Because I've talked to a lot of parents that have kids that struggle with addiction, and their pain is immense. Their pain is so great. You guys know I loved someone that struggled with addiction, and I didn't think my heart could get broken, but now more or harder. But now that I have children, the idea that my kid could struggle the way my husband did, the idea that my child, I would be having to send them to an average of 7 rehabs before they got sober, the idea that I couldn't sleep at night without knowing where they were or what they were doing or the choices they were making, whether they were using or not, who they were hanging out with, that is terrifying to me. And I'd much rather sit there and be the bad guy now than have them suffer the consequences. So at the very least, let's make a pact to not purchase drugs or alcohol for our children. Let's at the very least sit there and say, okay, we're going to make a pact as a community to not provide a safe place for them to invite their friends and drink. Because even the legal liability, if something, God forbid, went wrong, you could lose your house. You could lose your job. You could go to jail. You could be sued and lose everything you got. What? So because you want to be the parents that provided the alcohol at the house? That's crazy pants to me. In fact, someone just, I think it was last year, I heard of a parent. The funniest part is about this is he was a lawyer. The dad is a lawyer. The mom, I don't know what she did. And they hosted a party. They did it. I know this is the crazy part. I'm going to tell you the story about this parent, but I know I can tell you like dozens of stories now about parents in my neighborhood or in my city that I know of personally that do this. But these parents, the dad was a lawyer, the mom was something else, I don't know what, I can't remember. And they hosted a party with a bunch of kids from high school, and they took their keys and they said, okay, we'll supply the beer or the alcohol and we'll go upstairs and we'll just pretend we're not here, right? So they did this, and one of the kids left because he didn't have keys. He drove his boat to their house. I guess apparently they lived with a dock or something. He got in the boat. He left at night with 2 girls or 3 girls. They got into a boating accident. One of them died. The kid that was drinking the boat, is now was facing charges. And so are the parents. Like, there's too many risks that can happen with this kind of behavior, let alone the messaging that this is sending kids, that it's okay to drink underage safely. Why can't we turn this around and stop that and say, why don't we just teach our kids it's not okay to drink or use drugs, period? That actually it can be very cool, liberating, and freeing to not drink or use drugs. And you want to know one of the reasons why I think we don't do this? Is because then we would be hypocrites if we drank, right? Because truly sitting there saying, I don't want you to drink, but I'm going to keep alcohol in the house and drink occasionally, that might make us look like hypocrites. And so, and a lot of people enjoy a couple drinks in the evening or more. And so we don't want to stop drinking. And that's behavior that we need to look into as well. We need to check ourselves and go, is there a slight dependence on a drug and alcohol is drug. It's a drug. So is there a slight dependence? It might not be alcohol, like might not need rehab for it, but is there a behavior there? If you are unwilling to not have something in your life, a substance in your life, then chances are you might have a dependence on it. Like for me, I'm just going to flat out say right now, I have a dependence on sugar. Every time I eat a meal, I just need something sweet at the end. I know and I haven't researched this yet, but I'm pretty sure I probably have an addiction to sugar. I'm pretty sure that's true for me. So, because the idea of not having something sweet, just like, I just hate it. I don't know what it is. I'm like, no, I need a cookie, or I sound like a baby, but like I need a cookie, or I need like ice cream, or I need like something, like fruit doesn't do it for me. Right. So what's that about? I don't know. But I know that if you sit there and say you're never going to eat sugar again for the rest of your life because you don't want your kids to eat sugar, I'm sitting here coming up with all the reasons why I need sugar. And so we need to look at that and sit there and go, we've got to change these future generations so that when they leave us and they launch into the world and they're out from under us and they go into college, the way we can measure it is, okay, is the culture of these colleges and universities changing? Is it now becoming more socially acceptable to not drink? Are there greater populations of kids that are abstaining, right? And if your child is not going to go to college, they're going to go to trade school, or they're going to go get a job, are they still choosing a life of sobriety? That's the only way I can think of that we can change the numbers, that we can have a real dent in the future of addiction, that we can take a bite out of it and go, okay, we're going to slash the numbers. Because in my research that I'm doing, I'm finding that and we covered this before, one of the primary factors of why people become addicted is because of their neighborhood, their community. There's a super fancy word for this that is called, oh gosh, it's so fancy. And you guys know I'm dyslexic, so I get all these big fancy words mixed up. Epidemiology, okay? Epidemiology is the study and analysis of the distribution, determinants, and patterns of health and disease in defined populations, which basically is just a fancy way of saying your community. How accessible is alcohol or drugs in your community? That's one of the major factors of why people become addicted. So if your kids can get alcohol because you're supplying it to them at a young age, I really beg you to reconsider this, to hold off on that decision. And if they decide to get alcohol or drugs somewhere else, okay. But at least you can check yourself and go, all right, I'm not contributing to the numbers of addiction. And I can look back on the way I raised my kids and I can say I've chosen to teach them values and morals that do not line up with addiction. I know that's a little harsh, I know. But I'm saying this to you because we are the population that is getting affected the most by addiction. We are. That's why we're here. That's why we're listening to this. So if there's anybody that can change the trajectory of addiction and take down the numbers, it is us. We are empowered to do this. We sit there and we go, I feel so powerless over this disease. BS, you are not powerless over this disease. That is a lie, a lie, a lie. And that is one of the reasons why I started this community, because I read that and I thought, because it is a popular belief in the addiction world that you admit you're powerless over addiction. No way, Jose. Not you, not me, not us. We are powerful over this disease. We do have choices. And one of the choices that we have to check ourselves with is, what are we launching into the world, meaning our kids, and how are we sitting there? Are we helping or are we enabling addiction? And so a way to measure that is to say, what am I teaching? What values and morals around addiction am I teaching my kids? What am I really passing on to the next generation? Is the next generation going to still be ruined by addiction? Or am I sitting there as a parent doing everything that I can in my power to change the outcome? Now, if you have kids and they are struggling with addiction, I am certainly not saying that it is your fault. And if you have kids, and you are saying like, Michelle, I love them and they're grown up and, my time's over. I've lost my influence. I don't believe that's true. I don't care if your kid is 36 years old. If you have a good relationship with your child, you still have influence over them. It is never too late to educate them about the reasoning, put the why behind it, like my son needs, why they should choose not to drink. Because I know that, because I've been doing this forever, that addiction doesn't, like, their chances of addiction are always there. They don't go away with age. Now they go down. They're less and less, thank God. But I was just learning in this class about a woman who was incredibly smart. She actually was a student at Stanford, and she bravely shared her story with us that she became addicted to opioids. She was a doctor. She was a doctor. She went to medical school. She was a brilliant woman, and she became addicted to opioids during her, I think it was her after her first child was born. And the ironic thing is, she was going to medical school at Stanford, and she was on a committee specifically to help other practitioners who were struggling with addiction, people who had become addicted. And she was on this committee helping them while she became addicted. So it can happen at any stage of your life. It can happen with opioids, which is actually, and I'll go into this in another podcast, during this class, while I'm taking this class, I'm taking notes and thinking, how am I going to change my lifestyle? Like, what am I going to do as a parent of children that possibly have this genetics? What commitments am I going to be willing to make around drugs and alcohol? So immediately I went through all of our medicine cabinets and was like, do I have any opioids in here that I was unaware of? Do I have any addictive substances in our home? What is the accessibility? And then also part of that dialogue, I'll never forget this. My oldest son, broke his arm on ice skating, which is hilarious because we were there all of 5 minutes, and he just fell on the ice, and it just went like, it just hit, the ice hit his hand wrong. And what's crazy is I knew it was broken. I don't know how I knew. I just knew. And he was like sitting on the ice crying. They got him ice to ice his wrist or his arm or whatever. And I just went up to him and I'm like, he broke his arm. I got to take him to the hospital. Like, as a mama, I just knew. So we piled him in the car. It was all 6 of my kids. We had just gotten our skates on. And can you imagine, I think he was 10. I don't know how old he was, 8, 10, something around there. Can you imagine all of those kids? He's the oldest. How long it takes to get skates on, ice skates, to lace ice skates for all of those children. It was insane. It took us like an hour just to get on the ice. He's on there for 5 minutes. He breaks his arm. We got to get all the skates off before we drive him and he's like waiting, crying, wanting to go to the hospital. And I'm like, just pull the laces. Let's go. We've got to go. Anyways, that's exactly how my life is. It's always messy. It's always chaotic. And there's always you always just have to laugh because you'll lose your mind if you don't. So anyways, we race him to the hospital and he gets an x-ray and sure enough, it's broken. And the nurse comes in. It was a male nurse. He comes into the hospital, the waiting room. I think my son was 10. I'm pretty sure. And he says to my son, and I'm standing next to him, look, you fractured your arm. I'm going to put you on some medication. And my son says, what kind of medication? And he said, oh, it's this, it's a drug called Oxycontin. And my son, not me, says, well, is it addictive? And right as he's asking that, my husband calls because he's out in the waiting room with all the other 5 kids and they're crawling all over the the chairs and and he's like, Michelle, is there any way I can just go and like drop off the kids at home and I'll get a babysitter and come back because we cannot wait in this waiting room a minute longer. We're going to get kicked out or somebody else is going to be admitted into the hospital, one of these other kids, because they're going to kill each other. And I was like, yes, go, like, please go. And then come back whenever you can. We're going to be a while. So I didn't hear the conversation between my son and the nurse. And so as soon as they're done talking and the nurse I said, do you mind if I pull you outside and talk to you out here for a minute? To the nurse. And the nurse said, yeah. Okay. And so we go outside the door and I said to him, listen, we have addiction in our family. Lance's biological dad is addicted to drugs and alcohol. What was that prescription you were talking about? Because it was new. It was relatively a new drug at that time. That at least where I was living, it was just now being introduced. And I said, I really don't want him taking anything that could potentially be addictive or mind altering or whatever. And he said to me, oh, your son already talked to me about this. He already told me about his father. And he said he didn't want to take anything that could be addictive. But I assured him it was okay, that there's no possibility of, if he took this, it would not result in addiction. And I said, okay, because he's a doctor, right? He's a nurse. He went to, he said some training. And I believe that the training at that time, now having known about the Oxycontin drug, and there is an amazing book about it that is about the family that started the drug Oxycontin, invented the drug. Awful. You can Google it if you want to. But I believe that at that time, the training was that this was not an addictive painkiller. So this nurse was not trying to be deceptive. He was saying what he was trained to say. And the book, just in case you're interested, it's fantastic. It's called Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Slacker Dynasty. It's really entertaining, by Patrick Radden Keefe. So it's called Empire of Pain. But anyways, I think this nurse was only telling me what he had been taught, but he was dead wrong. So I walk back into the room and there's my son laying in the thing, waiting to get a cast. And I said, are you, first of all, I commended him for being honest about his father's disease, because that takes tons of courage for him to do. And he advocated for himself and he was not ashamed of his family history. So that was hugely commendable. And I said, I'm so proud of you for doing that. And that was because we had, by that point, dozens and dozens of conversations about addiction, right? That's why we continue to talk to our kids. Even when they roll their eyes at us, we say, listen, you're in charge of your own personal health. And you need to know your family history, and this is the risks that you have. It's for instances like this. And so I said, congratulations for telling him that. I'm very proud of you. What are you thinking? And he said, I'm not touching it. I'm not going near it. I don't care what he says. I'm not going to go near it. If it's a controlled substance, I'll just take Tylenol. So he's writing me a prescription for Tylenol too. Like the heavy, whatever, there's an extra dosage of Tylenol you can get. And I was never more proud. Like, that to me was fantastic. And that is what I'm talking about. I promise you, I'm not saying this to be like, look at me, I'm the best mom. Because trust me, just come to my house, stay here for a couple hours. It will be very, very real for you that I am not doing a parenting podcast for a reason. But I do think I've done a very good job of educating my kids about addiction. So this is why we start, though. And this is why we're upfront and honest about what is going on with our families. And some of you sit there and you go, Michelle, if I told my kids that their dad or their mother was struggling with addiction, my spouse or my partner might get very mad at me. Tough. I don't care. You have to be honest. Too bad, so sad. This is about giving our siblings, our kids, all the information. Just like I give you all the information, whether sometimes it's difficult for me to share and I'm worried that how you're going to respond, I still choose to tell you and get over my fear because I believe that you need to know the facts. Whether you agree or like them or not, it's my only job is to sit there and educate you. If you don't want to hear it or you don't want to believe me or you disagree, that's fine. That's great. Okay. Totally fine with me. But at least I can sit there and look at myself in the mirror and go, I really have done my best job of providing them all the things I think would be helpful. And that's your job as a parent. You are their advocate. You're their only advocate. And when we decided to have our kids and bring them into this life, specifically with somebody who struggled with addiction, we took on that responsibility. So if the person's going to be mad at you or not, it doesn't matter. Your job is to start that dialogue with that child at the earliest possible convenience. I started talking about addiction when I had a 2-year-old. I had started having dinner conversations about that. For me, that was appropriate. Now, is it appropriate for every family? I don't know. You get to make up your own mind when you think it's appropriate, but it needs to start at least at the very latest middle school. At the very, very latest. If you have a child entering middle school and you have not talked to them about addiction, you need to start right now. And remember, it's never, ever too late because addiction can happen to anyone. And this poor doctor that I mentioned that was, told her story in this class that I'm taking was so brave and talked. It happens to everyone, all walks of life. Rich, poor, intelligent, average, everyone can be affected by addiction. It tries to take down all of us. So nobody is safe here. Nobody can sit there and go, I'm good. I'm all set. Thank you very much. And I'm reading a book now, which don't worry, I'm not going to overwhelm you because we're talking about so much lately that the research can get overwhelming. I know. I hear you. But eventually I am going to talk. I'm reading about The Craving Mind. That's what the book is called, The Craving Mind by Judson Brewer. And it talks about how many different things can become addictive to us. Technology can become addictive to us. Social media. We can become addicted to social media. We can become addicted to food. We can become addicted to consumption and shopping. Addiction is all over the place. It doesn't just happen in the form of drugs, alcohol. And so let's start educating our kids. Exercise. Exercise is one of the up-and-coming new addictions that's being researched and diagnosed. Lord knows I do not have that problem, though. I wish I had a little smidget of exercise, of wanting and enjoying exercise, but I'm actually still in my pajamas recording my podcast to avoid getting on that elliptical. But anyways, okay, so hopefully you found something in this podcast that was helpful. Look, I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer, bearer of bad news, life sucks. It doesn't. I am so flipping proud of my kids. Now, I've only got 2 of them biologically that are in the ages where they have been presented with alcohol and turned it down. So I can't claim that all my kids are in the green and in the clear, right? Because I just said it's never... It can happen at any stage of life. But it is positive and so freaking great to see my kids take this disease that has taken away their father from them and use it for good, and to use it as a moral compass. That to me is terrific. And my daughter did find a college that is in, it's called Elon University, and it's in North Carolina. And I don't know how it's going to go. I'll let you know. I'll be honest with you. But she didn't choose that big party school after all. And I'm proud of her. And remember, or I'm telling you to remember, I'm trying to remember myself. It's one decision at a time, right? I can't sit here and ever make the blanket statement that none of my kids will ever touch drugs or alcohol. I pray that they don't. But I'm not naive in thinking that it's going to be an easy choice for them. And I'm preparing myself. But at least I can look at myself in the mirror and go, I did my best in educating them, and I did my best not to enable them. And I think collectively, as if we as parents stick together and say, hey, let's do our best to present to the next generation the choice of not drinking or using drugs, we can start a whole new trend. We can make it cool again to abstain. How about that? How about that? That would be amazing, right? I love that idea. So when I think about my next 5 or 6 years, I think a lot about what am I going to do to help educate not only, parent or loved ones of alcoholics or substance users, but also kids. Where's my role and responsibility in that? Because I think that's how we're going to make a difference. I think that's how we're going to change this. All right, that's it for today. I appreciate you. I'm here for you, and I'll talk to you next week. This podcast is created for your support, encouragement, and entertainment with my personal thoughts and beliefs. We are bonded together by the fact that we love someone suffering from addiction. This is not intended as a substitute for therapy or advice from a professional.